They say money talks, but on a fateful flight from New York to London, it screamed. You are about to hear the story of Preston Calloway, a man whose net worth was in the billions, but whose common sense was bankrupt. He thought he could humiliate a quiet woman sitting in seat 1A just because she didn't look like she belonged in his world. He called her names. He threw her bag. He demanded she be removed. But he didn't know that the woman he was insulting didn't just buy a ticket. She was moments away from buying the entire plane. This is the story of the most expensive mistake in aviation history. The cabin of Global Airways Flight 902 smelled of expensive leather and chilled champagne. It was the sort of atmosphere where the air felt thinner, cleaner, and decidedly more expensive than the oxygen circulating back in economy. First class on the Dreamliner was less like a plane and more like a floating hotel lobby, populated by the type of people who hadn't touched their own luggage in decades. Among them was Preston Calloway. Preston was a man who wore his wealth like a suit of armor, loud, shiny, and hard. He was the heir to a shipping conglomerate, the kind of person who had never heard the word no without firing the person who said it. He swept into the cabin wearing a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than a Honda Civic, talking loudly into his phone. "I don't care what the board says. Sell the assets," he barked, not bothering to lower his voice. "If they have a problem with it, they can call me. I'm flying to London to close the deal myself. Yeah. Just get it done." He ended the call and shoved the phone into his pocket, looking around the cabin with a sneer of ownership. He was used to being the biggest fish in the pond, the alpha in every room. He scanned the seats, checking for rivals or celebrities, but his eyes stopped at seat 1A. His seat was 1B, directly across the aisle. Sitting in 1A was a woman. She was black, perhaps in her late 40s, dressed in a comfortable, nondescript beige tracksuit and sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she was reading a paperback book with a cracked spine. There were no diamonds on her fingers, no Rolex on her wrist, no designer logo screaming for attention on her chest. She looked normal. To Preston Calloway, normal was offensive. Normal didn't belong in the sanctuary of first class. He stopped in the aisle, his path blocked by a flight attendant, offering a pre-flight beverage to the woman. Preston didn't wait. He cleared his throat, a loud, guttural sound designed to demand attention. "Excuse me," Preston said, his tone dripping with irritation. "You're blocking the aisle." The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah with a patience reserved for saints and service workers, turned with a professional smile. "I apologize, Mr. Calloway. Let me just—" "Forget it," Preston snapped, brushing past her, his shoulder checking the flight attendant slightly as he threw his heavy leather briefcase onto his seat. He remained standing, staring down at the woman in 1A. She didn't look up. She turned a page of her book, her expression serene. Preston frowned. He wasn't used to being ignored. He looked at the overhead bin above seat 1A. It was closed. He looked at the bin above his seat, 1B. It was full with blankets and pillows. He huffed, grabbed the handle of the 1A bin, and ripped it open. Inside was a single, slightly worn duffel bag. It looked like something you'd take to a gym, not a transatlantic flight. Preston scoffed audibly. He reached up, grabbed the handle of the woman's bag, and yanked it out. "Excuse me." The voice was calm, low, and velvety. The woman in 1A had finally looked up. Her eyes were dark and sharp, holding a glint of steel that Preston completely missed. "This is my bin," Preston lied smoothly, holding her bag like it was a piece of trash. "I have a fragile garment bag. I need the space. You can put this—" He gestured vaguely toward the back of the plane. "Somewhere else." "The bins are shared, sir," the woman said, closing her book. and I believe there is plenty of space in the bin behind you." "I prefer this one," Preston said. "And frankly, I don't trust my $3,000 suit next to whatever this is." He dropped her bag. He didn't hand it to her. He didn't place it on the floor. He dropped it. It landed with a heavy thud in the middle of the aisle. The cabin went silent. The soft clinking of glassware stopped. 2 rows back, a tech mogul named David Chen lowered his noise-cancelling headphones. The woman looked at the bag on the floor, then back up at Preston. She didn't yell. She didn't gasp. She simply tilted her head. "Pick it up," she said. Preston laughed. It was a cold, incredulous sound. "I beg your pardon? You dropped my bag. Pick it up." Preston leaned in, his cologne overpowering the scent of champagne. "Listen to me, lady. I don't know how you got that ticket. Lottery winner? Employee pass? Affirmative action promotion? But let's be clear about the hierarchy here. I paid $12,000 for my seat. I am a Diamond Medallion member. I personally know the CEO of this airline. I don't pick up bags. I have people for that." He kicked the bag slightly with the tip of his polished Oxford shoe, sliding it toward her feet. "Now, move it before I trip over it and sue you for everything you're worth, which, judging by the shoes, isn't much." Sarah, the flight attendant, rushed forward, her face pale. "Mr. Calloway, please. I can take the bag. There's no need for this." "No," the woman said. Her voice cut through the tension like a knife. She held up a hand to stop Sarah. "Let him finish." The woman stood up. She wasn't tall, but she had a presence that suddenly made the cabin feel very small. She smoothed the front of her tracksuit and looked Preston dead in the eye. "You think I don't belong here," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "I think you're cluttering up the view," Preston sneered, "and I think you're in my way. Now sit down, shut up, and enjoy the free peanuts, or I'll have you escorted off this plane before the wheels even move." The woman smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "You want to escort me off the plane?" "I want you gone," Preston declared, turning his back on her to arrange his suit jacket. "This cabin is for the elite, not for tourists." The woman reached into her pocket. For a second, the tension spiked. Was she pulling a weapon? A phone? She pulled out a simple black card. It wasn't a credit card. It was thick, metallic, and had no numbers on it. Just a single gold chip and a signature. "Sarah," the woman said softly. The flight attendant jumped. "Yes, ma'am?" "Who is the captain of this flight?" "Captain Miller, ma'am." "Tell Captain Miller that Catherine Hightower would like a word, and tell him to bring the manifest." Preston froze. He had heard that name. Catherine Hightower. The name was whispered in boardrooms, usually with fear. Catherine Hightower wasn't just a CEO. She was a venture capitalist shark who had swallowed 3 of Preston's competitors for breakfast in the last decade. She was the woman who had famously shorted the housing market in 2008 and used the profits to build a clean energy empire. But Catherine Hightower was a myth to him, a signature on a contract. She wasn't this woman in a beige tracksuit in seat 1A. "Hightower." Preston laughed nervously, turning back around. "You?" "Please. Identity theft is a felony, sweetheart." Catherine didn't look at him. She looked at her watch. "You have exactly 2 minutes to apologize and put my bag back in the bin, Mr. Calloway. After that, the price goes up." The air inside the first-class cabin had turned from luxurious to suffocating. Every passenger was watching now. Phones were out. The red recording lights were blinking. Preston Calloway, however, was too blinded by his own ego to notice the digital audience documenting his demise. He looked at Catherine, then at the bag on the floor, and made a fatal calculation. He decided to double down. To a man like Preston, Backing down was a sign of weakness, and he would rather burn the plane down than look weak. "You're bluffing," Preston spat. "Catherine Hightower is a legend. You're just some delusional woman who thinks a fancy name drop will save her. You want an apology? Here's my apology. I'm sorry you can't afford a stylist." He sat down in seat 1B, buckling his belt with an aggressive click. "Stewardess! Champagne, now, and get this trash." He pointed at the bag. "Out of my sight." Sarah, the flight attendant, looked paralyzed. She looked at the woman, Catherine, and then at the furious man. "Ma'am," Sarah whispered to Catherine, terrified. Catherine didn't sit. She remained standing, her posture perfect. She tapped the black card against her palm. Tap, tap, tap. 2 minutes are up, Catherine said. Suddenly the cockpit door opened. Captain Miller, a silver-haired veteran pilot with 4 stripes on his shoulders, stepped out. He looked annoyed at being called back, but the moment his eyes landed on the woman in 1A, the annoyance evaporated. It was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. "Ms. Hightower?" the captain stammered. He didn't just walk, he rushed over, nearly tripping in his haste. He adjusted his cap, looking like a cadet facing a general. I had no idea you were on board. The manifest just said, VIP guest. If we had known..." "It was a last-minute booking, Captain," Catherine said, her voice cool and professional. "I preferred to travel incognito. Clearly that was a mistake." Preston Calloway's face went the color of curdled milk. He sat up straighter, his hands gripping the armrests. "Captain, you know this woman?" Captain Miller turned to Preston, his expression hardening. "Mr. Calloway, I suggest you lower your voice. You are speaking to the majority shareholder of the holding group that owns this airline." The silence that followed was louder than a jet engine. Preston blinked. "What?" "Global Airways," Catherine said, her voice conversational, "is a subsidiary of Titanium Holdings. I acquired Titanium 6 months ago. I didn't publicize it because I wanted to see how the company was running from the ground up." She gestured to Preston. "I see we have some quality control issues with our clientele." Preston's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. You own the airline?" "Technically," Catherine corrected. "I own the debt that the airline is leveraging to stay afloat, which means I can call in that debt whenever I like. Or I can simply make executive decisions regarding passenger safety and comfort." She turned to the captain. "Captain Miller, this passenger has been verbally abusive, has touched my personal property without consent, and is disrupting the flight. I don't feel safe flying with him." "Understood, Miss Hightower." The captain nodded immediately. He turned to Preston. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to grab your bags and deplane." Preston unbuckled his belt, his face turning a deep, violent shade of red. "You can't be serious. Do you know who I am? I am Preston Calloway. I have a meeting in London that is worth $50 million. If I miss this flight, I will sue this airline into the ground." "You can try," Catherine said, stepping closer to him. She leaned down, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "But my lawyers are better than yours, and my pockets are deeper. You have a $50 million meeting. That's cute. I spent $50 million on this plane just to ensure the legroom was adequate." "This is illegal," Preston shouted, standing up. "I have a ticket, a contract." "And you breached the contract's code of conduct," Catherine said calmly. She looked at her phone. "I just sent a text to the head of airport security. They are waiting at the gate. You can walk off, Mr. Calloway, or you can be dragged off. But make no mistake, this plane does not leave the tarmac with both of us on it. And since I own it, I think you know who's staying." Preston looked around the cabin. He saw the faces of the other passengers, wealthy, powerful people he wanted to impress. They weren't looking at him with respect. They were looking at him with pity. Some were snickering. He grabbed his briefcase. His hands were shaking. "This isn't over," he hissed at Catherine. "I will destroy you." Catherine laughed. It was a genuine, hearty laugh. "Mr. Calloway, you are a bug on my windshield. Now get off my plane." Preston stormed down the aisle, shoving past the flight attendants, muttering curses. The walk of shame was long. Every eye in economy watched the man in the expensive suit storming off the plane, his face a mask of humiliation. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, Catherine turned to Sarah. "Sarah, I'm sorry for the disturbance," Catherine said, her demeanor instantly softening back to the polite woman from before. "Please, distribute a round of the vintage Dom Perignon to the entire cabin. On me. And for the inconvenience." She looked at the empty seat 1B where Preston had been sitting. "Is there anyone in economy traveling with a child? Or perhaps an elderly person?" Sarah nodded, her eyes wide. "There's a young man in row 42. He's a soldier, I think, traveling home to Germany. He looked very cramped." Catherine smiled. "Go get him. Tell him his seat has been upgraded. Seat 1B is available." As Sarah rushed off to make a soldier's day, Catherine calmly bent down and picked up her duffel bag. She placed it gently in the overhead bin, closed the latch, and sat down. She opened her paperback book. The plane was hers. The flight was quiet. But the karma, that was just getting started. Because what Preston didn't know was that Catherine wasn't just kicking him off a plane. She was about to cancel his entire life. The heavy reinforced door of the aircraft sealed shut with a mechanical thud that vibrated through the floor of the jet bridge. To most, that sound signals the beginning of a journey. To Preston Calloway, standing alone in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor, it sounded like a prison cell slamming shut. He stood there for a moment, staring at the grey metal. His breathing was ragged, shallow bursts of air that clouded in the chilly temperature of the bridge. The adrenaline that had fueled his outburst in the cabin was beginning to sour into a toxic mix of confusion and blinding rage. "This is insane," he muttered, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. He adjusted his suit jacket, though the sweat was already beginning to dampen the expensive Egyptian cotton shirt beneath. "She can't do this. Nobody does this to me." He spun around and marched up the incline toward the terminal gate, his leather loafers clacking aggressively against the floor. He formulated his plan as he walked. He would demand a manager. He would demand a refund. He would demand that the woman in 1A be arrested for something. Harassment, theft of services. He didn't care what the charge was, as long as it stuck. When he burst out into the gate area, the scene was not what he expected. Usually, a gate area after boarding is a quiet place. A few stragglers, some cleaning crew, a bored agent typing at a computer. But today, the air at gate B12 was electric. 3 gate agents were huddled behind the podium, their faces pale, whispering furiously. As Preston stormed toward them, they looked up, and their expression shifted from concern to something colder. Recognition. "You!" Preston pointed a trembling finger at the lead agent, a man whose name tag read Arthur. "You let that plane close its doors, open it back up. Right now. There has been a misunderstanding, and if you don't fix it, I will have your job by lunchtime." Arthur didn't flinch. He was a seasoned airline veteran with graying temples and eyes that had seen every type of tantrum the traveling public could throw. He slowly placed both hands on the counter. "Mr. Calloway," Arthur said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "The aircraft has pushed back. It is taxiing to the runway. That flight is gone. Then bring it back. Preston slammed his hand on the counter. "Call the tower. Tell them there is a VIP passenger who was wrongfully ejected." "Sir," Arthur said, leaning in slightly, "you weren't just ejected. We have just received a message from the flight deck and corporate security. Your ticket has been voided. Your return ticket has been voided. And your frequent flyer status has been suspended, pending a legal review." Preston laughed. It was a high, manic sound. "Suspended? Do you know how many miles I fly with this airline? I am a Diamond." "You were a Diamond member," Arthur corrected, typing a few keystrokes. "Now, the system shows you as no-fly list, internal, which means, Mr. Calloway, you aren't getting on another Global Airways flight. Ever." Preston felt the blood drain from his face. Fine. Keep your garbage airline. I'll book with British Airways. I'll fly private if I have to. Just get my bags off that plane." Arthur shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid your luggage is already en route to London, sir. Per FAA regulations, usually, we remove bags when a passenger doesn't fly, but the captain authorized an override due to security concerns regarding passenger volatility. Essentially, sir, they decided it was safer to get you off the property immediately than to wait for your suitcases. You can collect them at Heathrow's unclaimed baggage office." "Unclaimed baggage?" Preston choked out. "My prototypes are in there. Confidential merger documents." "Then I suggest you find a way to get to London," Arthur said, turning back to his screen. "Next." There was no one else in line. Arthur just wanted him to leave. Preston pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking so hard he mistyped his passcode twice. He needed to call his assistant. He needed to charter a jet. His phone buzzed, then it dinged, then it vibrated. A barrage of notifications flooded the screen. Instagram, Twitter, X, TikTok, LinkedIn. What is this? He clicked on a text message from his PR manager, a woman named Jessica, who usually only messaged him during business hours. The text was all caps. "Do not speak to anyone. Where are you? Have you seen the video?" Preston frowned. He opened Twitter. Trending number 1 in the United States. Not a first-class bigot. Trending number 2. Preston Calloway is over. His stomach dropped. He tapped the top hashtag. There it was, a video, clear as day, filmed from row 2. It showed him standing over Catherine Hightower. It showed him kicking her bag. It captured every sneering word. "I don't pick up bags. Affirmative action promotion. Get this trash out of my sight." The video had been posted 12 minutes ago. It already had 3.4 million views. Preston watched himself on the tiny screen, the audio crisp and damning. He looked monstrous. He looked arrogant. But worse than that, he looked weak. He looked up from his phone and realized the atmosphere in the terminal had changed. People sitting in the waiting area weren't just looking at their phones. They were looking at him. A teenager in a hoodie held up his phone, recording. A woman in a business suit whispered to her colleague, pointing at him with a look of disgust. Preston Calloway, the man who prided himself on controlling the narrative, was suddenly the main character of the world's most humiliating story. He backed away from the counter. This is out of context," he whispered to no one. He turned to run, to find a private lounge, a bathroom, anywhere to hide. But as he turned, he bumped into 2 large men in dark blue uniforms, airport police. "Preston Calloway?" the taller officer asked. "I didn't do anything," Preston squeaked. "She provoked me." "We're not here to arrest you, sir," the officer said, his face impassive. "But the airline has requested you be escorted out of the secure area immediately. Your boarding pass is invalid, which means you are trespassing in the terminal." "Trespassing?" Preston sputtered. "I'm a billionaire." "You're a trespasser," the officer said, grabbing Preston's elbow firmly. "Let's go. Curbside." As Preston was marched through the terminal, flanked by police, the whispers grew louder. It was a slow, agonizing parade. He felt every set of eyes on him, stripping away his armor of wealth, layer by layer. He wasn't a titan of industry anymore. He was just a man being thrown out of the building while the internet sharpened its knives. 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding on the ground. The cabin of the Dreamliner was dim and peaceful. The engines hummed a low, hypnotic lullaby, and the scent of warm roasted nuts and fresh espresso drifted through the air. Catherine Hightower sat in seat 1A, a glass of sparkling water resting on the linen tablecloth before her. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't gloating. She was working. She had her laptop open, the screen glowing with spreadsheets and dossiers. To her right, in seat 1B, the seat Preston Calloway had so vigorously defended, sat a young man named Elias. Elias looked like he was afraid to touch anything. He was maybe 22, with a high and tight haircut and a worn camouflage backpack tucked neatly under the seat. He was staring at the lie-flat bed controls with a mixture of awe and confusion. Catherine glanced over, closing her laptop slightly. "You know, if you press the button with the cloud icon, it gives you a massage." Elias jumped, startled. "Oh, sorry, Mom, I've never seen anything like this. I was happy with the extra legroom in row 42. Catherine smiled gently. "Where are you headed, Elias?" "Ramstein Air Base, Germany, Ma'am. Deployment." "My flight had a layover in London." He hesitated. "I saw what happened with that guy." "Did you?" "Yes, Ma'am. He was out of line." Elias looked down at his hands. "I just wanted to say thank you. For this. You didn't have to do it." "The seat was empty, Elias. And frankly, I prefer the company of someone who serves their country over someone who serves only himself." She took a sip of water. "Relax. Sleep. You have a long job ahead of you." Elias nodded, finally pressing the recline button. Within minutes, the exhausted soldier was asleep. Catherine watched him for a moment, her expression soft. Then the softness vanished. She put her reading glasses on and turned back to her screen. It was time to handle Preston. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to make a scene. She just needed information. She pulled up the file on Calloway Shipping Logistics. It was a family company, inherited, not built. Preston had taken over as CEO 3 years ago. Since then, the stock price had been volatile. He was aggressive, risky, and leveraged. Catherine's eyes scanned the financial reports. Debt-to-equity ratio, high. Upcoming maturation of bonds. Next quarter. Key pending deal. The London merger. "There it is," she whispered. Preston had mentioned a meeting in London worth $50 million. According to the industry gossip columns and the trade reports on her screen, Calloway Shipping was trying to secure a frantic merger with Sterling Maritime, a classic British shipping firm, to save themselves from bankruptcy. If Preston didn't sign that deal in London tomorrow, his company would default on its loans. Catherine tapped her chin. Sterling Maritime. She opened her contacts list. She scrolled past senators, tech billionaires and philanthropists until she found the name, Nigel Sterling. She checked the time. It was late evening in London, but Nigel would be awake. He was an owl. She picked up the plain satellite phone handset. It was heavy, cold, and expensive. She dialed the private number. It rang twice. "Sterling here." The voice was crisp, British, and sounded slightly weary. "Nigel," Catherine said, her voice warm but commanding. "It's Catherine Hightower." There was a pause, then a genuine shift in tone. "Catherine, my goodness, I haven't heard from you since the Clean Energy Summit in Davos. To what do I owe the pleasure? Are you finally going to let me buy you dinner? I'm actually on my way to London right now, Nigel. I'll be landing in about 5 hours. Splendid. We must meet. We will, Catherine said. But first, I need to talk to you about a meeting you have scheduled for tomorrow morning. With a Mr. Preston Calloway. Nigel sighed audibly. Ah, yes. The American loudmouth. It's a necessary evil, I'm afraid. His distribution network in the States is valuable, even if the man himself is, well, difficult. We're poised to sign the merger at 10 coals a.m. Nigel, Catherine said, leaning back in her seat, watching the clouds drift by the window. I want you to kill the deal. Silence stretched across the Atlantic. Kill it? Nigel asked slowly. Catherine, we've been negotiating for 6 months. The lawyers represent— I know, she interrupted. But you don't know who you're getting into bed with. Preston Calloway isn't just difficult, Nigel. He's a liability, a volatile PR nightmare of a liability. What do you mean? Check your email. I just forwarded you a link. Catherine waited. She heard the clicking of a mouse on the other end. She took a slow breath. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Good Lord, Nigel whispered. That video is currently trending globally, Catherine explained calmly. He abused a passenger. He abused the crew. He was escorted off the plane by police. I was the passenger, Nigel. He did this to you? Nigel's voice went hard. He did. But that's personal. Business is business. Think about your brand, Nigel. Sterling Maritime has a 200-year history of dignity and respect. If you sign a merger with Preston Calloway tomorrow morning, while this video is on every news channel in the world, you aren't just buying his ships. You're buying his reputation. Do you want the Sterling family crest associated with that? No, Nigel said immediately. Absolutely not. The board would revolt. The shareholders would have my head. Exactly, Catherine said. He's desperate, Nigel. His financials are shaky. He needs you more than you need him. The deal is off, Nigel said firmly. I'll have legal draft the termination letter immediately. He's supposed to be here at 10. He won't be, Catherine said. He's currently stuck at JFK, banned from the airline. But I'm sure he'll try to call you. I won't answer, Nigel promised. Catherine, thank you. You've saved me from a massive embarrassment. I did have one other thought, Nigel, Catherine added, twirling a pen in her fingers. Oh? Since you're now in the market for a US distribution partner, and since Calloway Shipping's stock is about to plummet when the market opens and hears the deal is dead, perhaps my logistics division, Titanium Transport, could step in. Nigel laughed. It was a relieved, impressed laugh. You never stop, do you, Catherine? You want to buy his company. I don't want to buy his company, Nigel. I want to buy his ships for pennies on the dollar once he goes bankrupt. And then I want to sign that distribution deal with you. Titanium Transport is a much more stable partner, Nigel mused. Bring the paperwork when you land, Catherine. Let's have breakfast. See you at breakfast, Nigel. Catherine hung up the phone. She looked out the window. The sky was turning a deep indigo as they flew into the night. She had just destroyed a $50 million deal and paved the way to acquire a competitor's assets, all while sipping sparkling water. She looked over at Elias, the soldier, sleeping soundly in the seat Preston had claimed was for the elite. Preston Calloway had wanted to teach her a lesson about hierarchy. He wanted to show her where she belonged. Catherine smiled, picked up her paperback book, and found her page. He was right about one thing. There was a hierarchy. He just didn't realize that in the world of real power, noise doesn't make you a king. Strategy does. And the king had just been checkmated. The curb outside Terminal 4 at JFK was a desolate place for a man who believed he owned the world. The wind whipped off the Jamaica Bay, carrying the scent of jet fuel and exhaust, biting through the thin fabric of Preston Calloway's Italian suit. He stood by a concrete pillar, shivering not just from the cold, but from a shock that was settling deep into his bones. His phone was a burning coal in his hand. Every vibration was a new catastrophe. Ping. Notification from Bloomberg. Callaway shipping stock tumbles 12% in after-hours trading following viral CEO incident. Ping. Text from his PR crisis manager, Jessica. Preston, stop calling me. The board is convening an emergency meeting. You need to go dark. Now. Go dark? Preston screamed at the phone, startling a woman waiting for a taxi nearby. I have a company to save. He couldn't fly commercial. That bridge was burned, nuked, and salted. He needed a miracle. He dialed the number for a private charter service he had used once for a bachelor party in Vegas. Blue Horizon Aviation. This is dispatch. This is Preston Calloway, he barked, trying to summon the authority he had possessed only an hour ago. I need a jet to London. Heathrow or Luton, I don't care. Immediate departure. There was a pause on the line, the sound of typing. Mr. Calloway? Ah, yes. We have a Gulfstream G650 available, but given the short notice. How much? It would be a one-way charter, sir. $85,000. Upfront wire transfer. Preston squeezed his eyes shut. 85 grand. That was liquid cash he didn't really have right now. His accounts were tied up in the merger leverage, but if he didn't get to London, 85,000 wouldn't matter. 50 million would vanish. Send the wire instructions, he hissed. I'll be at the FBO in 20 minutes. The ride to the private terminal was a blur of yellow taxi interior and panic. When he finally boarded the private jet, there was no sense of triumph. Usually, flying private was an ego stroke. The plush leather, the catered food, the freedom. Now the empty cabin felt like a coffin. He sat alone. No flight attendant, just him and the hum of the engines. As the plane climbed into the night sky, Preston connected to the onboard Wi-Fi. It was slow, agonizingly slow. The loading bar on his browser crawled pixel by pixel, mimicking the torture of his own anxiety. He pulled up the video again. He couldn't help himself. It had jumped from 3 million views to 15 million. The comments were a waterfall of vitriol. Imagine being this rich and this miserable. He threw her bag. Bro, if that was my mum, he wouldn't have walked off that plane. Short Callaway shipping. This guy is a dinosaur. Preston threw the phone onto the seat opposite him. He poured himself a whiskey from the crystal decanter, his hands shaking so violently the amber liquid splashed onto the mahogany table. He needed to talk to his father. William Calloway was the retired patriarch of the family, a man who had built the shipping empire with ruthless efficiency and kept it afloat through sheer force of will. He was 80 years old, living in a fortress-like estate in Connecticut. He was the only person Preston feared more than bankruptcy. Preston dialed the number. You! His father's voice came through the line, raspy and cold as a winter draft. There was no greeting. Dad, listen. It's a setup, Preston began, pleading. The woman, she provoked me, she... Shut up, William snapped. The sound was like a whip crack. I watched the video, Preston. I watched my son, the CEO of my legacy, acting like a petulant child in front of the entire world. I can fix it, Preston insisted, gripping the phone. I'm on a jet to London right now. I'll meet with Sterling. I'll sign the deal. Once the merger is announced, the stock will stabilize. The news cycle moves fast, Dad. They'll forget about the video in a week. Nigel Sterling is a man of honor, William said slowly. Do you think he signs contracts with clowns? It's business, Preston yelled. He needs our distribution network." "We received a call 20 minutes ago," William said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low volume. "From the bank, the consortium that holds our operating debt. They saw the video. They saw the stock drop. They are invoking the material adverse change clause." Preston. Preston felt the blood leave his head. "No, they can't. That clause is for natural disasters. For war. They consider your leadership a disaster," William said. "They are freezing the credit line. If you don't sign that deal with Sterling tomorrow morning, the checks we issued for fuel last week will bounce. We will be insolvent by Friday." "I will sign it," Preston screamed. "I promise you, I will make him sign it." "You better," William said, "because if you come back empty-handed, don't bother coming back to the office, or the house. You'll be finished." The line went dead. Preston stared at the phone. He was 40,000 feet in the air, traveling at Mach 0.9, yet he felt like he was drowning. He looked out the window at the black abyss of the Atlantic Ocean. Somewhere down there, in the darkness, was the reality he was trying to outrun. He closed his eyes, but sleep was impossible. Every time he drifted off, he saw the calm, unbothered face of the woman in Seat 1A. He heard her voice. 2 minutes are up. He checked his watch. 4 hours to London. 4 hours until he could save his life. London was weeping. A grey, relentless drizzle blanketed the city as Preston's private jet touched down at Luton Airport. It was 8:30 a.m. He looked like a wreck. His suit, crisp and sharp yesterday, was now wrinkled and stale. His eyes were red-rimmed, surrounded by dark circles that spoke of a sleepless, tormented night. He hadn't shaved. The stubble on his jaw was grey and patchy, aging him 10 years in 10 hours. He bypassed customs quickly thanks to the private terminal, grabbing his briefcase. He didn't have his luggage. His clothes, his toiletries, his presentations were all sitting in the lost and found at Heathrow, miles away. He had to do this with nothing but the clothes on his back and the desperate energy fueling his movements. "Get me to the city," he ordered the driver of the black Mercedes waiting for him. "Sterling Maritime HQ, Bishopsgate, and drive fast." The car tore off onto the wet motorway. Preston spent the ride checking the stock market again. The New York Stock Exchange hadn't opened yet, but the London pre-market was active. Callaway Shipping was down another 8%. The rumors of the debt freeze must have leaked. The sharks were circling. Come on," Preston muttered, tapping his foot maniciously against the floor mat. They hit traffic. Of course, London traffic was a beast that cared nothing for billionaire urgencies. They sat bumper to bumper on the A40, watching the minutes tick by. 9:15 a.m., 9:30 a.m., 9:45 a.m. "Move!" Preston yelled at the driver, as if the man could levitate the car over a double-decker bus. "I can't go anywhere, sir," the driver said calmly. Preston opened the door. "I'm walking." "Sir, we're 3 miles away. In the rain." Preston slammed the door shut again, cursing. He was trapped by the time the car pulled up to the gleaming glass and steel tower of Sterling Maritime. It was 10:15 a.m. He was late, but maybe, just maybe, Nigel was running late too. Maybe he was waiting. Preston sprinted out of the car, ignoring the rain soaking his shoulders. He pushed through the revolving doors into the lobby. It was a cathedral of commerce, white marble floors, soaring ceilings, and a hushed atmosphere of serious money. He marched to the security desk. "Preston Callaway," he announced, breathless. "Here to see Nigel Sterling. I have a 10 a.m. meeting." The receptionist, a young woman with impeccable posture and a headset, looked up. She didn't smile. She didn't check her computer. She simply looked at him. "Mr. Callaway," she said, her British accent clipped and cool. "Mr. Sterling is not available." I know I'm late, Preston pleaded, wiping rain from his forehead. Traffic was hell. Just call him up. Tell him I'm here. It's the merger. He knows. Mr. Sterling is aware you are here, sir, the receptionist said. I have been instructed to inform you that your appointment has been cancelled. Cancelled? Preston gripped the marble counter. You can't cancel a $50 million meeting. Get him on the phone. Mr. Sterling is currently in a meeting, sir. With who? Preston demanded. Who else could he possibly be meeting with right now? I am the only partner he has. I'm afraid I cannot disclose that information. She looked at the security guard standing nearby. The guard took a step forward. Preston backed away. Fine, I'll wait. I'll sit right here until he comes out. He walked over to a leather bench in the lobby and sat down. He was dripping wet. People were staring. He pulled out his phone to call his lawyers, to call anyone. Then the elevator pinged. The sound was sharp and clear in the cavernous lobby. Preston looked up. The central elevator doors slid open. 2 people walked out. One was Nigel Sterling. He was a tall, silver-haired man in a Savile Row suit, looking every inch the British aristocrat. He was laughing, a relaxed, genuine sound. And next to him was a woman. She wasn't wearing a beige tracksuit anymore. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit that looked like it was cut from silk and steel. Her hair was perfectly styled. She looked fresh, rested, and radiant. It was Catherine Hightower. Preston stood up. His legs felt like jelly. He felt like he was watching a ghost. "Nigel!" Preston shouted, his voice cracking. Nigel Sterling stopped. His smile vanished instantly. He looked at Preston not with anger, but with a profound, distant disappointment, like one would look at a dog that had soiled the carpet. "Mr. Calloway," Nigel said. He didn't step closer. "Nigel, what is this?" Preston gestured wildly to Catherine. "Why is she here? We have a deal. I have the papers right here." He fumbled with his wet briefcase. "We don't have a deal, Preston," Nigel said. "We never signed anything. And after yesterday's display, we never will." "That was a misunderstanding," Preston cried, walking towards them. The security guard stepped in his path, blocking him. "She provoked me. Nigel, look at the numbers. The synergy." "I have looked at the numbers," Nigel said calmly. "And I have looked at the character of the man running the numbers. Sterling Maritime requires partners who possess stability and dignity. You, sir, have neither." Nigel turned to Catherine. "Catherine, my driver is out front. Shall we head to lunch? I believe there's a lovely spot in Mayfair that serves that Pinot you like." "That sounds wonderful, Nigel," Catherine said. Her voice was the same velvet tone from the plane. She turned to look at Preston. She didn't sneer. She didn't gloat. She simply looked at him with a pity that was far more devastating than hate. "Mr. Calloway," Catherine said softly, "I told you. The bins are shared." Preston stared at her, his mouth open, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. "What? What did you do?" he whispered. "I acquired the assets you were too busy to protect," Catherine said simply. "Mr. Sterling and I have just reached an agreement in principle for titanium transport to handle his North American logistics. It's a very lucrative contract. It's a shame you missed it. The legroom in the conference room was excellent." She turned back to Nigel. "Shall we?" "Indeed." They walked past him. Preston Calloway, the billionaire, the heir, the master of the universe, stood alone in the middle of the lobby, wet, bankrupt, and broken. He watched them exit through the revolving doors into the grey London morning. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't answer it. He knew who it was. It was the bank. It was his father. It was the end. He looked down at his shoes. They were ruined by the rain. "Sir?" The security guard was standing over him. "You'll have to leave now, sir. This is private property." Preston looked at the guard. He wanted to scream. He wanted to fight, but he had nothing left. The tank was empty. I don't have a car," Preston mumbled. "There's a bus stop around the corner," the guard said, pointing to the door. Preston Calloway turned and walked toward the exit. He pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The rain was falling harder now. He looked up at the sky, but there were no planes. Just heavy, grey clouds pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had insulted a passenger's seat, and in return, the universe had taken his chair at the table. But the story wasn't quite over, because, while Preston had lost his business, he hadn't yet faced the true, personal cost of his arrogance. That was waiting for him back in New York, and it was going to be televised. The return to New York wasn't on a private jet. It wasn't even in business class. With his credit lines frozen and his corporate cards cancelled, Preston Calloway sat in seat 34E, a middle seat in the back of a discount airliner. The flight was a 6-hour claustrophobic nightmare. To his left, a toddler screamed with the lung capacity of an opera singer. To his right, a man slept heavily, his elbow firmly planted in Preston's ribcage. Preston stared at the seat back in front of him, the plastic tray table vibrating with the turbulence. He didn't dare ask for water. He kept his head down, a baseball cap pulled low, praying nobody recognized the first-class bigot. But privacy was a luxury he could no longer afford. When he stepped out of the arrivals gate at JFK, the flashbulbs blinded him. He hadn't realized the story had grown this big. It wasn't just an internet meme anymore. It was a symbol of the class war. Reporters swarmed him like sharks, sensing blood in the water. "Mr. Calloway, is it true your father has removed you from the board?" "Preston, do you have a comment on the bankruptcy filing? How does it feel to lose $50 million in a single day?" He pushed through them, his face pale and sweaty. "No comment. Move. Get out of my way." He reached the curb, his eyes scanning for his driver. Then he remembered. There was no driver. There was no limo. He stood there, bags at his feet, as the cameras rolled. He was forced to do the one thing he had mocked Catherine for. He had to wait for a shuttle bus. 2 weeks later, the final blow landed. And yes, it was televised. Preston sat in a small, furnished sublet in Queens, the only place he could afford while his assets were frozen by the SEC investigation. He sat on a lumpy sofa, watching CNBC. The headline on the screen read, "Titanium Holdings acquires Calloway assets." The camera cut to a press conference standing in front of what used to be the Calloway shipping headquarters. The familiar blue logo was already being scraped off the glass. Standing at the podium was Catherine Hightower. She looked regal, composed, and undeniably powerful. "Ms. Hightower," a reporter asked, "you've acquired a distressed asset with a toxic reputation. How do you plan to rebuild the company's image after the Calloway scandal?" Catherine leaned into the microphone. Her eyes seemed to look right through the camera lens, piercing into Preston's living room. "We are making changes immediately," Catherine said. "First, we are rebranding. Calloway Shipping is no more. We are launching Horizon Logistics." She paused, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "And secondly, we are instituting a new corporate travel policy for all executives. At Horizon, nobody flies private, and nobody flies first class until they have spent at least 1 year working in the warehouse. We believe that if you want to lead people, you must understand that no seat is more important than another. There are no trash bags, only people carrying their loads." Preston watched as the reporters applauded. Then the camera panned to the side. Standing next to Catherine was a young man in a sharp suit. He looked familiar. He was clean-shaven now, but the posture was unmistakable. It was Elias, the soldier from row 42. "I'd also like to introduce our new head of veteran recruitment," Catherine announced, placing a hand on Elias's shoulder. "Sometimes you meet the best people when you simply open your eyes and look at who is sitting next to you." Preston turned off the TV. The silence in the room was deafening. He had insulted a woman for her seat, and in return, she had taken his company, his legacy, and his pride. She had taken the trash and turned it into treasure. He looked at his own luggage sitting in the corner, a pile of expensive leather bags that now held everything he owned. He walked over, picked up the duffel bag and slung it over his shoulder. He had a job interview in an hour. It was for an assistant manager position at a logistics warehouse. The pay was minimum wage. He opened the door and walked out into the hallway. The elevator was out of order. Preston Calloway sighed, gripped the railing, and began the long walk down the stairs. And that is the story of Preston Calloway, the man who paid the ultimate price for a first-class ego. It's a brutal reminder that in life, the tables don't just turn, they flip. Preston thought his net worth gave him the right to treat people like dirt, but he forgot the golden rule of travel. We are all heading to the same destination. Whether you're in 1A or 34E, turbulence hits everyone the same. The only difference is who will help you when you fall. Preston pushed away the hand that could have saved him, and he ended up walking alone. If this story gave you chills, do me a favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. I post new stories about karma, justice, and real-life drama every week. And tell me in the comments, do you think Preston deserved a second chance, or was this the perfect ending? Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to be humble. See you in the next one.